Ever wondered how the Amish and Mennonites really live behind those peaceful barns and horse-drawn buggies? While many praise their simple lifestyle and strong faith, there's a hidden side few ever see. Beneath the surface lies a world of strict control, abuse, and silence, where speaking out can mean total exile. These are the disturbing truths they never want outsiders to know. Reality 1. Sexual abuse. Investigative journalism has uncovered 52 documented cases of sexual abuse across 7 states and Amish communities over the past 2 decades, though this doesn't capture the full picture. Victims are often viewed as equally guilty as abusers. Even children are treated as consenting partners committing adultery. Church leaders systematically cover up abuse, with forgiveness and repentance prioritized over legal action or victim protection. Reality 2. Silencing victims. When abuse is reported, Amish women are often sent to culturally appropriate mental health facilities where they're medicated into silence, essentially becoming zombies according to survivors. These facilities aren't state licensed and provide Bible-based counseling designed to suppress victims rather than heal them. Women who try to seek help face excommunication, while church leaders threaten permanent banishment for speaking to outsiders. The systematic silencing ensures predators continue operating with impunity while victims suffer alone. Reality 3. Educational limitations. Amish children receive only 8th grade education, with formal schooling ending at age 14 to 15, severely limiting their future options if they choose to leave. The 1972 Supreme Court ruling Wisconsin versus Yoder exempted Amish from compulsory attendance beyond 8th grade, effectively trapping children in their communities. Teachers typically have only 8th grade education themselves, with no training in science, advanced mathematics, or critical thinking. Former Amish describe this educational restriction as deliberate control mechanism. You do not go to school after the 8th grade. To even think about it is heresy. By denying higher education, communities ensure children cannot develop skills needed for outside world survival. Those who eventually leave must pursue GEDs while lacking basic knowledge in science, mathematics, and modern society, creating nearly insurmountable barriers to independence. Reality 4. Shunning control. Shunning represents complete social death, where excommunicated members are cut off from all family contact, business relationships, and community support. Even family members risk excommunication for maintaining contact with shunned individuals, creating impossible choices between loved ones and community survival. The practice extends beyond religious matters to enforce compliance with arbitrary rules about clothing, transportation, and lifestyle choices. Some communities practice strict shunning, where individuals remain banned for life unless they return to their original church and confess. Even minor violations like attending non-Amish church services can trigger shunning. Shunned people rarely live at home and lose access to all economic, social, and emotional support systems. For individuals raised without outside world skills or education, shunning effectively means choosing between spiritual conscience and physical survival. This psychological control mechanism keeps most members compliant through fear rather than genuine belief, creating communities built on terror rather than faith. Reality 5. Failed reporting. Church leaders systematically fail to report serious crimes to authorities, instead handling abuse and violence through internal discipline that protects perpetrators while endangering victims. An Amish bishop in Dauphin County was convicted for failing to report child abuse, telling police one incident wasn't really that bad. In Missouri, 4 Amish elders pleaded guilty to endangering child welfare after shunning a perpetrator but failing their duties as mandated reporters. They received only $300 fines each. This pattern repeats across communities where church discipline replaces legal accountability. The preference for internal handling means no police reports, no rape kits, no professional investigation, and no real follow-up treatment for victims. Abusers typically receive 6 weeks of shunning after confessing their sin in front of congregation, then return to normal community life with access to new potential victims. Cases that do reach courts find Amish communities overwhelmingly supporting abusers who appear with nearly entire congregations behind them, while no one speaks for victims. This institutional support for predators and abandonment of victims demonstrates systematic moral failure disguised as religious practice. Reality 6. Economic dependency. Amish communities create deliberate economic dependency that makes leaving nearly impossible, especially for women and young people. With only eighth-grade education and no exposure to modern technology, members lack skills needed for outside employment or financial independence. Women face particularly severe economic control, typically working only within family businesses or community enterprises. While some own small businesses, these operate within closed Amish networks that would disappear if they left the community. Most Amish women have never learned to drive, use computers, manage bank accounts independently, or navigate modern employment systems. The community rejects commercial insurance, social security, and government assistance, creating dependence on church mutual aid systems that only function for compliant members. Leaving means losing not just family relationships but entire economic survival networks built over generations. Young people face impossible choices: remain in restrictive communities with guaranteed economic support, or venture into unknown world without education, job skills, or financial resources. The economic trap is so effective that 85 to 95% of youth return after Rumspringa, not necessarily from religious conviction but from practical necessity. This system creates communities populated by people who stay not from genuine choice but from engineered dependency, fundamentally undermining claims about voluntary religious commitment. Reality 7. Mental health. Mental health problems are systematically mishandled in Amish communities, with depression, anxiety, and trauma often treated as spiritual failings rather than medical conditions. The community's rejection of modern psychology and psychiatry leaves mentally ill members without proper treatment while facing additional stigma for their struggles. Women experiencing domestic violence or sexual abuse frequently develop mental health conditions that are then used against them. Instead of receiving professional help, they're often labeled as having mental issues and sent to unlicensed Amish counseling facilities that focus on submission and obedience rather than healing. The facilities mentioned by survivors involve forced medication with antipsychotic drugs like olanzapine, often without proper medical supervision or informed consent. Women report being drugged into compliance, with discharge notes recommending they be submissive and challenge unhealthy thoughts toward ministers. Suicide rates and self-harm among young Amish people are rarely discussed openly, but former members report significant struggles with mental health during transition periods. The combination of isolation, limited education, restricted communication, and fear of shunning creates perfect conditions for depression and anxiety. Professional mental health resources are actively discouraged, with community members taught to rely solely on prayer, confession, and church discipline for psychological problems. This approach leaves genuinely mentally ill individuals without treatment while enabling further abuse of those seeking help for trauma-related conditions. Reality 8. Gender inequality. Amish and Mennonite communities practice systematic gender inequality that goes far beyond traditional roles, creating conditions where women have no meaningful autonomy or protection from male authority. The patriarchal system positions men as absolute heads of households, with unquestioned authority over wives and daughters. Women must submit to husbands as unto the Lord, according to biblical interpretation, meaning resistance to male authority equals resistance to God. This religious justification makes questioning gender inequality tantamount to apostasy, punishable by excommunication and shunning. In domestic violence situations, church leaders typically counsel women to submit more, be better Christians, and have sex more often to appease abusive husbands. When women seek help from police, they face excommunication and community rejection. One Mennonite woman was told she couldn't return to church until promising to submit to her husband and never call police again. Women cannot hold leadership positions in churches. cannot make major family decisions independently, and often have no vote in community matters despite claims of church voting rights. Educational opportunities for girls are particularly limited, with emphasis placed on domestic skills rather than intellectual development. The system creates conditions where women experiencing abuse have no recourse except prayer and endurance. Physical violence, sexual coercion, and psychological abuse are often reframed as women's spiritual tests or failures to properly submit to male authority. Even economic activities by women require male permission and oversight, ensuring they never develop true independence or ability to support themselves outside male-controlled family structures. Reality 9. Medical neglect. Amish communities' rejection of modern medicine creates dangerous situations where treatable conditions become life-threatening due to religious beliefs and distrust of outside medical intervention. The preference for home births, folk remedies, and prayer over professional medical care has resulted in preventable deaths and disabilities. Mental health conditions are particularly neglected, with depression, anxiety, PTSD, and other treatable disorders viewed as spiritual problems requiring prayer rather than medical intervention. Children with developmental disabilities often receive no professional assessment or support services, instead being viewed as God's will requiring acceptance rather than treatment. The community's rejection of health insurance means medical crises create devastating financial burdens that often go untreated. While mutual aid systems exist, they typically cover only basic needs and may not extend to expensive treatments or long-term care needs. Vaccination rates are often low in Amish communities, creating public health risks during disease outbreaks. Traditional gender roles mean women handling healthcare decisions for families often lack medical knowledge needed to make informed choices about treatment options. Emergency medical situations reveal the deadly consequences of medical isolation. Stories emerge of treatable conditions becoming fatal because families delayed seeking professional care, relying instead on traditional remedies or prayer. Children have died from conditions that would be routinely treated in mainstream medical settings. The medical neglect extends to mental health emergencies, where suicidal individuals or those experiencing psychotic episodes receive religious counseling rather than psychiatric intervention. The combination of limited education, distrust of outside professionals, and religious interpretation of illness creates systematic medical neglect disguised as faith-based healing. Reproductive health is particularly affected, with women receiving little education about contraception, pregnancy complications, or reproductive rights, leading to dangerous home births and untreated reproductive health issues. Reality 10. Control systems. Amish and Mennonite communities operate comprehensive control systems that monitor and restrict virtually every aspect of members' lives, from clothing choices to communication with outsiders. The Ordnung community rules governs everything from buggy colors to acceptable employment, creating rigid conformity enforced through constant surveillance. Communication with the outside world is heavily restricted and monitored, with many communities prohibiting internet access, limiting phone usage, and discouraging relationships with non-community members. This information control prevents members from learning about alternatives to their lifestyle or accessing resources for help. Travel outside the community requires permission and oversight, with young people's Rumspringa periods heavily monitored despite public perception of freedom. Parents track their children's activities and relationships, ready to intervene if behavior threatens community control. Business dealings with outsiders are controlled through community oversight, ensuring economic relationships don't lead to ideological contamination or independence from community systems. Even seemingly independent Amish businesses operate within strict community guidelines about acceptable practices and customer relationships. Social relationships within communities are monitored for signs of dissent or inappropriate influence. Members who ask too many questions, express doubts, or form relationships with problematic individuals face increased scrutiny and potential discipline. The control system creates an environment where members practice self-censorship, knowing that expressing doubts or questioning authority could result in social consequences. This psychological control is often more effective than direct punishment because it operates through internalized fear rather than external force. Geographic isolation reinforces control by limiting exposure to alternative viewpoints and making it difficult for members to develop relationships outside the community. The combination of educational limitations, economic dependency, social control, and geographic isolation creates total institution characteristics that make genuine choice about community membership nearly impossible. Reality 11. Puppy mill operations. Many Amish communities operate large-scale puppy mills that prioritize profit over animal welfare, housing hundreds of breeding dogs in substandard conditions. These operations often involve keeping breeding females in cramped wire cages for their entire lives, with minimal veterinary care and inadequate socialization. The dogs are treated as livestock rather than companions, with emphasis on maximum reproduction rather than health or temperament. Many puppies sold from these facilities suffer from genetic disorders, behavioral problems, and health issues due to poor breeding practices and inadequate early care. When authorities attempt to investigate animal welfare violations, Amish communities often close ranks to protect operators.